Hey, it's syndicated radio talk show host, author, singer, and record producer Al Cole welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. I come from CBS Radio. My shows are nationally syndicated, and you can email me at al@alcoholic.com. You heard me right. That's AL@ALCOLEHOLIC.com. And I really want to thank my CBS Radio fans for coming up with that handle, Alcoholic. Yeah, seems like from day one, my fans have been saying, Al, we love what you're doing there, brother. In fact, we're hooked on it. We're alcoholics. And we don't have to be anonymous about it either. So we keep it in the family that way. Coming up, a family member. This guy's name is Daniel Robinson. I call him a family member because he's really a human family member here. He's out to serve our human family, just like People of Distinction. So he is welcome here on People of Distinction. Now, first thing is that he's an ABC screenwriter. Whoa there. Now, that's impressive. And he's going to be talking a little bit about his screenwriting venture right now, the very popular show called How to Get Away with Murder. Okay. People of Distinction is not known for violence. I'm first to say that. But this is not a violent show, even though it's called How to Get Away with Murder. It spotlights defense attorneys. Whoa. Now, isn't that great? Because we all need to be defended sometimes by the system. The system comes down hard on us sometimes, and we know that there's so many innocent people that are still, they're put behind bars and this and that, and some people who are, big-time offenders, and sometimes they're locked away for, 10 years, 20 years. Right. So we need defense attorneys. And we're going to be talking, stick around, people, because we're going to be expanding that to, well, if we need defense attorneys so much in our world, and we do in this country, How come there are so many prosecuting attorneys out there, particularly in major politics? Anytime you get a chance to go to C-SPAN, and I really like C-SPAN, and it's part of Apple's iTunes radio network, whenever I hear, a hearing, a congressional hearing, or even a senatorial hearing or something, but particularly a congressional hearing, and a congressman or woman will say, yes, and I'm a former prosecuting attorney for this state, that state. I never hear, I'm a former defense attorney. How come they're all prosecuting attorneys? Do we really need that in our time, prosecuting people? And even the people who say that, I'm a progressive. Well, how come they started out as prosecuting attorneys then? Daniel has some answers here. I'm not going to give any answers right now, although I have some answers, but I'm going to let Daniel talk about that. So stick around, people, if you're wondering about the answer yourself. Oh, boy, Daniel can provide. And Daniel is a millennial, and I like that, because we need to follow some of the advice of millennials, particularly in our day and time. Millennials, they're the most populous generation out there. That means there are more millennials than any other group of people. Second are the baby boomers. And if baby boomers and millennials can come together messaging-wise, generationally, intergenerationally, wow, that's a powerful block. So let's help make that happen on People of Distinction. And Daniel's going to introduce us to his new book as well. It's called First They Ignore You. Ignore you, why? Well, maybe they ignore you because of addiction and eating disorders, which are prevalent in our society, or maybe because you've been ignored, then you turn to addiction, and then you turn to eating, and you become disordered that way. I don't know. We're going to ask Daniel all of that stuff, and this guy's going to come up with the answers. He's very articulate. And I want you to run to his, no, he doesn't have a, I'm so used to saying, run to his website, which is really Amazon, and order his book, First They Ignore You, on Amazon. He's going to tell you a little bit about his Instagram as well. So, welcome to People of Distinction with Al Cole, Daniel. It's a pleasure to have you aboard. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, Al.
My pleasure, and you deserve it. You're doing great work. So, let's start it out. Actually, I want to start with your book first, and then get into some real proactive talk with your ABC screenwriting, How to Get Away with Murder, and spotlighting defense attorneys and everything. But let's start it out with First They Ignore You. Now, I know that has something to do with addiction, eating disorders, which, as I said earlier, are prevalent in our society. And tell us, why you wrote a book about that. Maybe you suffered from that. Maybe you got over it. Maybe a best friend, a family member, or something. What was the genesis of that book? First They Ignore You. How did it come to pass?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I should say that I never suffered from a binge eating disorder, so this is definitely a work of fiction.
Uh-huh.
And I want to make that clear, but it does draw heavily on everything that I've ever learned as a writer in terms of starting from a place of personal truth. And the main character here, I would say the binge eating disorder is the symptom, but really what he's dealing with is anxiety and depression and low self-esteem. And those are all things that I've definitely wrestled with in my past. The reason that I chose addiction as the catalyst to tell that story is because if you start having conversations with so many people in this country today, I don't think there's anybody whose life hasn't been affected by addiction in one form or another, whether that's drugs or alcohol or as in the case here with an eating disorder. And I think that it really provided an opportunity to use a lot of the things that I had learned in my screenwriting career to put a story together that would be compelling on its own with a really, the main character's name is Russell, and he's a very exaggerated form of my own ego and my own demons, because I know I'm not interesting enough as an individual to sustain a narrative. But if I took this idea of all my faults and all my shortcomings and my defensiveness and my anxiety and all the things I encountered in a very real way in the 10 years it took for me to establish my career in Hollywood, in entertainment, then I could amplify that and really have a character who was compelling enough to follow along in their journey, but also really touched on these very honest and human things that I think would relate to a lot of people and benefit a lot of people to discuss, especially from a male perspective, because a lot of what he's dealing with are emotional issues that maybe a traditional archetype of masculinity would want to downplay. These aren't the traditional pratfalls that a male protagonist is supposed to succumb to. Having low self-esteem or having body image issues, having shame, having anxiety, having an inability to connect through love. And so all these things made it a really compelling because it felt original. It's a novel, so it should be a bit novel. And then it also felt like I could draw from a place of truth and understanding and still do my research on all the things that I hadn't experienced personally, and then put that together in a really compelling narrative. So it all kind of came together both in that artistic way, but also in a pragmatic way.
Absolutely. Excellent. Now, let's get into it. Let's turn some pages in your book. First They Ignore You, with addiction and eating disorders, binging, as you put it. How do you think some of these things arise? And even before that, as way of preface, you indicated that there's so many addictions out there. Actually, everybody's addicted to something at some time. And sometimes, every once in a while, we could be addicted to something that might be good for us. Maybe a little kid addicted to reading or something. I don't know. But usually, addictions are not always the best for us, and eating disorders certainly not good. How do people get involved in that stuff in the first place, being addicted or eating disorders, do you think?
I can't say for everyone, because I think there are definitely different pathways. I know that stress and like a feeling of being out of control in your life can definitely be something that can start someone on that pathway. If we're talking about harder drugs, they have addictive properties within them where a perfectly functioning individual, if they use those drugs a few times or enough, they might become addicted. When we're talking about food, it's something everybody has to eat. And from my research and what I try to explore in the book, there's no single pathway, but there are many contributing factors. Environment can be a huge factor, especially the messaging we're receiving in mainstream America. We receive a lot of messaging from commercials and advertisements and the availability of foods around us that we should always be striving for these really fast food. I don't just mean when I say fast food, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, but any food that you don't have to spend a lot of time preparing because it's been mostly prepared for you. Because typically those foods are deficient in nutritional value, but very high in fats, salts, and sugars, which are the things that can make food overly addictive. So people get a lot of messaging about coveting or desiring, delicious fast food meals. On top of that, because of the way a lot of our culture cities are designed, there's not necessarily a built-in avenue for exercise for a lot of people. It's easy to lead a sedentary lifestyle and then also be drawn towards these fast foods, these nutritionally deficient and addictive forming foods. On top of that, there's a lot of people who turn to it because of trauma in their life, maybe at a young age, maybe it happens later in life, some sort of emotional trauma, a physical trauma, where food becomes a comfort because there is a comforting value in eating a good, sustaining meal. It's a moment of joy throughout the day. It's nourishing to your body, and you might feel safe. You might have some previous emotional attachment to that. So there can be a lot of different pathways that lead to it. And I try to kind of explore those all with the fictional character. We go into his past a little bit and the emotional journey that he's been on that maybe set him on that path, his inability to handle the stress and the trauma in his life, and then also the messaging he's receiving from the culture around him that's kind of driving him down that pathway as well.
Your fictional character, now, what's his name? Because, of course, it's a male because you're referring to him that way. So let's get to know that fictional character. What's his name, and how did he get involved in this stuff?
His name is Russell Horvath,
mm-hmm.
and like I said, he's kind of like I took the parts of my ego that I felt were maybe the most defensive, the most also vulnerable and sensitive. Those little voices that we all have in our brains where we might be critical or judgmental of somebody else because they're coming from a place of insecurity. I took all those voices in my head and kind of amplified them into one main character. So he's really a smart guy. He's an aspirant screenwriter in Hollywood, which is very much where I was. And he uses that intelligence to kind of mask all of his problems from himself. So he's very good at, deflecting blame onto other people and making it seem like everything else is wrong around him. And he's the one who is the only sane person in the room. And then on top of that, he's really good at justifying to himself why it's okay for him to be in the state he's in. The whole book takes place over one weekend, and it's kind of a classic tale of someone hitting rock bottom to get that realization of what's going on in their life before they can get the perspective they need to put their life back together.
Absolutely. That's a really interesting point that you're bringing out right now with Russell. Pretty classic symptoms here. I've had a lot of people on my show, about 2,000 over the years, and some of them have talked about addiction, some of them have talked about eating disorders, and they've talked about, sometimes they talk about it because they've been involved, and then they overcame. Sometimes they're health people and talking about some of the people that they're working with that have addiction and eating disorders. In any event, some of the classic things are, you start out maybe kind of not liking yourself as much as maybe you think you do or you could like yourself, a little bit of low self-esteem. Sometimes it is low self-esteem that looks like high self-esteem, well, maybe with bullying, pushing people around a little bit to disguise how low you really feel about yourself, how maybe you don't even know that you feel low about yourself. And the way that you get gratitude is to kind of fluff stuff things, lift yourself up by denigrating others. Now, I'm not saying that Russell was necessarily in that category, but you did say, he was self-certain. Not your term, but still, it gets the message out there. And, don't worry, I've got you covered. I know the right way and all of that stuff. Maybe a little bit of screening of some of the things that he was really maybe shortcomings in his life. Addiction, eating disorders could be that way, particularly with women in eating disorders. Sometimes women particularly, they eat a lot when they have a loveless life. Or maybe they've been abused by a man along the way. We know these days a lot of women are coming out that way and saying, hey, look, I've been through the ringer. And as they come out, they might even say, it really, put me at a low point for a few years. And I was overeating, I became overweight, and food can sometimes become a sensual aspect. It can be a lover in itself. And it can be a surrogate lover. And, well, it's in the mouth, a very sensual area. And and it's supposed to be nourishing. You're nourishing yourself, you think. And you're overeating after a while. You don't need nobody. And it can be an excuse after a while for failure. Of course, they dismiss me because I'm overweight and everything. I expect that now and that sort of addiction. I don't know if Russell went through these things, but these things are pretty common in our society, the way that I'm laying them down, describing them, I believe. Daniel, is that right?
Yeah, I can't speak so much to the differences in the gender experience when it comes to overeating or relying on food in an unhealthy way that could ultimately develop into an addiction. I don't know the statistics on that. I know that for me, it was really important to tell it from a male protagonist character because that's what I know a little bit better and felt like I could approach with more authenticity. And from that point on, absolutely, I would say that it can start off very small. It can start because of feelings of emotional isolation and loneliness. There's definitely a sensual aspect to it as well and a comforting aspect to it. And there's many scenes in the book that I deliberately use sensual language, and it's almost an erotic experience when Russell, I think there's something where he like puts a seductive hint of ketchup on a fry and folds it over itself into his mouth till it kisses the back of his throat, taking all of it inside of him. Yeah. You know, there is this sensual aspect. It's part of the humor, but it's part of the truth as well. Yeah. And so absolutely, yes, from him, I think all that is there. And I tried to touch on each little part of this. And one of the things that I think, going back to his ability to kind of deflect or project confidence, is that it takes place in LA. And LA is a city where it's really easy to go and be invisible because there's so much personal ambition here. Most people are self-focused, right? They're focused on their career as an actor or as a singer or as a director or as a writer. There's so much personal ambition here. And that was something that I wasn't prepared for when I first moved out here, but it became apparent very quickly. There's a really funny chapter near the beginning where Russell has been forced to go to the gym by his girlfriend. She's gotten him a gift certificate there, for like their anniversary or something. And he's tried everything he can to get out of going there because that's where he feels the most self-conscious, because it's a gym full of the most beautiful people in the world, who are actors, and they spend all this time on their appearance. And he feels like, there's no actual gym for overweight people in Los Angeles. He doesn't know where he's supposed to work out, but it's certainly not there. And he's talking to this trainer who's been training his girlfriend, and she's gotten in great shape. And the trainer asks is like very, he's a really strong, ripped up guy. And he asks for a moment alone with Russell, and Russell starts freaking out. He's having a mild panic attack because he thinks this guy is on to him. And he knows that Russell's been having these binges. He's been sneaking out at night and eating all this food. But then all the trainer says is, I heard you sold your show. I would love for you to consider me. And I have some headshots here. I've changed my look. I've gone with the shorter hair. It's darker now. I think it's really a versatile look. And Russell starts laughing. And the guy asks him why he's laughing. And he has to cover. But he's laughing because he realizes, wow, I can really get away with this here. No one's going to call me out because all they see is the person that can help them with their career. Mm-hmm. And so he sees me as this writer who could maybe get him an acting job. Yep. So I tried to play with that. And it's mostly played for jokes in there. But, it does lead to moments of tragedy as well and real human growth.
Isn't that something? Hey, people, if you think it's something too, well, you got to run to Amazon and order this great new book by our guest, Daniel Robinson. Order First They Ignore You. And you can grab that on Amazon. And you're listening to People of Distinction with Al Cole. Always have the best guests on. Today, Daniel is also going to tell you a little bit about his Instagram, if you want to contact him there as well. You can buy the book at Amazon, contact him on Instagram. Tell us how they can do that through Instagram, Daniel.
Yeah, it's just the name of the novel, First They Ignore You. So you can find me, First They Ignore You, at Instagram, and we have the information there, the link to go buy the novel, and also we're going to be putting out over the next couple of months a lot of really cool content, some quotes from the book and some different images and inspirations and things like that, so it can enhance your experience if you've already bought a copy, and if you're looking to, you can find all the information there.
And just to cap off this first part of People of Distinction with Daniel and his book, First They Ignore You, I'm just going to ask you one other question here, Daniel. Obviously, your character, Russell, was going through a sense of denial, And, that's pretty common with addiction and eating disorders and everything, and laughing at, wow, this person, I got away with it. This guy didn't even see that, I'm less than actually what he thought I was. He's raising me up even higher. And maybe that even supports the denial. But then you said that, in the end, he was flat on his face at a certain point. And was there a happy ending to this?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, my goal in this was to really just kind of explore this issue of addiction, specifically food addiction, the emotional and the social components behind it. And I felt like it would be a disservice to the reader if I didn't give them that hope at the end, because it's not a hopeless situation, and there's definitely always a way out. It's not easy. It can take a lot of work. But absolutely, the book gives a lot of hope at the end, and I think brings Russell's journey full circle.
There you go. Hey, we love hope on People of Distinction with Al Cole, and we're going to give you more hope here because Daniel is involved in something else. I mentioned in my intro of Daniel, he's an ABC screenwriter. Now, that ain't so easy to do. ABC, one of the biggest networks out there, and to be a screenwriter with ABC is really something else. And he's got a show that he screenwrites called How to Get Away with Murder. All right, so we're not really going to so much find out how to get away with murder. I don't think we want to really encourage that. But That's the name of the show, and ironically, it's really not a show about violence. It's a show that spotlights some of the positive things that People of Distinction spotlights, and their array of defense attorneys, and they're coming to the rescue of people, and all of that good stuff. And we like that. We're going to find out a little bit more about how to get away with murder, and then we're going to turn the corner into, well, how about our major society here? The society that maybe some politicians are getting away with murder. I don't know, but, prosecuting attorneys, maybe some of them are getting away with murder. I'm not sure about that, but Daniel's he's got a great exposition, great way of explaining some of the things that defense attorneys are doing in positive ways that, how come prosecuting attorneys might not be doing it, or how come there aren't more defense attorneys out there in major politics, in Congress, in, the Senate, or maybe even in the Oval Office. Hey, let's get into some of that stuff. Let's start it out easy here with How to Get Away with Murder. What's that all about, that show, and how can we see that on ABC and all of that stuff, and it spotlights defense attorneys? Tell us a little bit about where that's coming from, How to Get Away with Murder.
How to Get Away with Murder is on ABC. As you said, the first 5 seasons now, we've done 5 seasons, are all available on Netflix as well for streaming. And it stars Viola Davis. She plays Annalise Keating, who is the nation's leading defense attorney. She works out of Philadelphia. She's also a professor at fictional Middleton Law School. And we tell kind of 2 storylines throughout the season typically. There's cases of the week, as we call them, where she has her client and she's representing them with her legal interns and her staff. But then also they all kind of starting from season 1 have gotten embroiled in an actual murder themselves. So they are using their skills and knowledge of the legal system to try to get away with this one murder themselves, which is maybe justifiable, but still they're trying to avoid having to do any jail time for it while they're trying to lead their normal day lives and work for their clients as well. And kind of the joke is, how to get away with murder? And the answer is you don't, because one way or another you might avoid legal prosecution, but the emotional toll, the social toll it takes on all of them, it gives us plenty of conflict to mind for story throughout 5 seasons as these people have dealt with the aftermath of the decisions that they've made.
Now, this is good. I want to ask you something. Even preceding the defense attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, all of that social action that we'll get into. You're a creative guy, obviously. You're a writer. You're a screenwriter, and that takes creative ability. When you screenwrite this week to week, what do you have in mind here? Is it method? I know that coming from CBS Radio and coming from major broadcasting, coming from music and books and everything else, I know how to put messages together because one word leads to another. I know how to group things in ways that are going to sound pleasing to people, ways to get things out that are going to be gripping and very absorbing. Then there's this other aspect of reality. Now, we can work within the constraints or maybe the great aspects of our craft professionally, get out messages. And then there's another way that we can do it. We can look at the real world and say, this has to be said, that has to be said. And we can be kind of authentic and, we can integrate the both. How do you become a good screenwriter here? Is it method, craft within the business itself, knowing what to say within the business and having your overseers, maybe the producer, the executive producer and the director saying, "Hey, Daniel, yeah, you're on the right track here. Viola's really going to run with this. You're really characterizing her well." Or sometimes they might say, it's brilliant. Those words are brilliant, but they don't fit with our actors here. Viola's going to have a tougher time being, living up to some of the characterization, some of the word choices. You know what I'm talking about. How do you do it here, craft-wise and realistic-wise with screenwriting?
Well, this is a tremendous question, and you're absolutely right. And I could probably spend days going over because this is this is the central dilemma in trying to do this type of work. And there are so many decisions and challenges into making that really effective. For me, kind of as a guiding light, I know that personally, I do feel like I'm a reporter in ways, even though I work purely in fiction. The show is fictional, the book is fictional, but I feel like we're using lies to tell the truth. And what I mean by that is there is a real unifying human truth. There's story truth, there's character truth that will touch on many different people. And when people experience it, when they watch it on TV or when they read it, they know it and they're drawn to it. And you got to have that truth, even if it's a sci-fi epic like a Marvel movie or whatever it is. If there's not that really emotional human truth at its core that's honest, and you're telling something that's honest to people, I don't think people are going to really be able to engage with it. And we do have competing interests constantly with the direction that the narrative needs to go because of things that have happened to the characters, choices we've made in the past for who they are as individuals, and then what choices they've made that have led them to where they are maybe at a previous episode, which is kind of where we always start for the next episode. Where did we leave Daniel last episode? Mm-hmm. Where did we leave Al last episode? Okay, they just had a big fight. So now we either need to have them reconcile or there needs to be an aftermath from that fight. And they fall out. And now there's the other people have to decide who are they going to side with. Maybe mm-hmm. Al's trying to recruit Laurel and Daniel's trying to recruit Michaela. Whatever it may be, we have to make those choices. And then just as you said, there's the actual, we're constantly doing research with the show. We're speaking to tons of victims' rights organizations, former inmates, current inmates, judges, lawyers, bounty hunters, people who've been victims of sexual assault. Glad that people who, trying to represent different voices, being an entirely inclusive storytelling show where we represent everybody and give them all equal weight story-wise. And so we might find really compelling stories about, women who have been arrested for killing their abusers. And so now they're facing life in prison because they're not allowed to argue self-defense because of the way that they killed their abuser. Mm-hmm. We want to tell that story, but maybe we don't have the room for it because we have a really big personal story we have to tell for Viola's character that episode. And we want this to be a big story, so we have to push it 2 or 3 episodes down the line. Mm. So we typically have a list of a lot of really, and unfortunately for our country, but fortunately for us as storytellers, there's no shortage of very compelling nuanced issues taking place in the criminal justice system now, where we can just rip right from the headlines, or oftentimes actually these aren't even being really reported about. They kind of fly under the radar because the criminal justice system, in my opinion, and kind of in the opinion of the show, has gone out of control. But it's kind of like a silent, I don't know what the right word for it is, it's something that's negatively impacting so many people in this country, mm-hmm. and especially people who don't have a voice, who don't have an access to tell their story. So we have no shortage of stories we want to tell about. I know we did something with civil asset forfeiture, for instance, which is taking place in Philadelphia, where the government, based on a law that was designed to stop large-scale drug dealers and drug suppliers, was now able to go into people's houses and for misdemeanor crimes, confiscate their entire property, whether they were guilty or not, without a trial. Whoa. And so people were losing their homes. They were low-value homes because they were in low-income areas, but people were losing their homes because maybe, like for instance, the story they would tell is like a grandmother who had her grandchild staying with her, and the grandchild sold a small amount of weed to an undercover cop on her porch. Now that allowed the police to come in and the prosecuting office to come in and confiscate her entire home. So she's instantly rendered homeless for something she had nothing to do. So this is a real thing that's taking place in Philadelphia. Wow. There's no shortage of these stories around the country. So like I said, it's to the deficit of the country. There are so many problems in the criminal justice system, but as storytellers, we have a very deep well to draw from, and it is a challenge. There's myself, there's 9 other writers on the show. The creator, his name's Pete Nowak. Ultimately, these are his decisions, and he's ultimately the shepherd of which way we go in making these tough choices. But we have very spirited discussions about them, and we all advocate strongly for different things that we believe in, different stories that we feel like are really important to get out there. And then you have to take them and make them interesting. You know, you can't just make it a documentary. So we have to find ways to put these important social issues into our characters' mouths and make them interesting plot-wise for the audience. So wow. It is that's the challenge of the job in and of itself.
Look at that. Now, people, what a great rundown. And, you know, that's not it, because Daniel's going to make another great rundown with getting into more of the stuff that really matters in our society at large. But he started out with some great stuff there. Great in terms of information with that Philadelphia situation where, you know, somebody sells some weed at a certain home on the, you know, right near the doorstep or something, on the stoop or whatever, and they get busted. But you know, the police don't stop there. This criminal justice system doesn't stop there, and they go and confiscate the property. Something wrong there, people, and we're going to get into making some of the wrongs right on. People of distinction with Al Cole, starting with order this book. First, They Ignore You. Getting back to Daniel's book, I want to put that on the focus too at Amazon, and check out this wonderful series here. ABC screenwriter Daniel Robinson and his series How to Get Away with Murder, and you can find it on Netflix and a lot of other areas here. Google that and get into it. And we're going to get into this right now. Daniel touched on it. You know, his series, How to Get Away with Murder, has some defense attorneys, and, you know, they're going for the public good. And Daniel came up with some great answers in my pre-interview chat. You people know that I have a pre-interview chat with every guest that comes on to formulate directions, find out what they're really good at communicating, and then making it something very interesting to you, my listening audience. Well, Daniel's a great communicator. Comes down to social issues, and he already touched on that. You know, I applaud him for being, you know, going outside the box, talking about on How to Get Away with Murder, some of the wrongs that are happening in our society, helping to make them right, defense attorneys and everything. So let's get into skirting the political issues here, getting into some social stuff, and how come there aren't more defense attorneys out there as opposed to prosecuting attorneys, like I said in my intro? Wow, a lot of prosecuting attorneys in major politics these days, but I think very few defense attorneys. Daniel has some interesting reflections on that, starting with, well, maybe defense attorneys aren't really in demand. Maybe they're looked upon as maybe a dead-end alley. Oh, you're helping people and all of that stuff, but in major politics, I put these people behind bars. Boy, that's real power. And sometimes they might have put the wrong people behind bars. I don't know. Daniel, let's hear the reflection on this with attorneys and prosecuting attorneys and all of that stuff and going into politics a little bit. Come up with something that, wow, stirs the people of distinction mindset right now for all of our listeners. Tell us what's really going on here with defense attorneys and prosecuting attorneys here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about this because it's something that I wasn't aware of until I happened to get a job working for this show. And, you know, I was a struggling screenwriter. I would have worked for any show, but I feel very blessed to have worked on this one and gone on this journey of discovery into the criminal justice system of America, because growing up, it seemed like kind of an inert, boring thing. And I should say my mom's a lawyer, but she even told me, don't be a lawyer, go do something that's a little more fun. And now I've realized that the law is absolutely fascinating, because it's a living thing. Our legal system is based on precedent. So every single case that's happening, and there's hundreds, thousands of them happening in all sorts of different jurisdictions with room for different laws around the country. And any one case can become that case, that becomes Brown versus Board of Education, Plessy versus Ferguson, Roe v. Wade, right? It can become the case that makes its way up to the Supreme Court and decides the law of the land, interprets the Constitution for us. So there's battles being fought every day all over this country for how we're going to live. What are the contracts that we want to make between each other for how we think we have to treat each other, how we have to live together. And it almost impacts people's lives more than the laws that Congress can enact, because the laws that they enact ultimately will be judged through the court system, right? And the Supreme Court will rule if they're constitutional or not. And I think, to go to your question, there are a couple of really pervasive ideas, maybe even assumptions that people have before they even really go into thinking about the law. And one of them is kind of this good guy, bad guy idea, that there are good people out there and there are bad people. And the job of law enforcement is to find the bad people, lock them up, and keep them away from the good people. And when you really start going down the rabbit hole and start understanding how the criminal justice system works in this country, who's in jail, what types of crimes they've committed, why they've committed those crimes, you see that the vast majority of people who engage in criminal activity did so because they came from a traumatic background, did so because they were victims of crimes themselves. They are also abuse victims. And this is not to justify what they've done at all, right? But just to understand the issue so that we can actually start making effective change, because we have a huge crime problem in this country. We incarcerate a higher percentage of our population than like the top 5 or 10 other countries combined after us, right? It is singularly an American issue, this idea of mass incarceration. And it disproportionately affects people of color and people from lower income brackets. It used to be, until I think the late 70s, early 80s, disproportionately affect men, but the female prison population has been dramatically on the rise as well, which is another issue.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize is, and I understand that the victims have rights and the victims need resolution and justice, and we'll get to that sort of at the end of this. But I think first you have to deconstruct some ideas, because what people don't realize is that every time you put someone away in jail, that's a potential mother or father, uncle, a primary caregiver for a young person, right? You're breaking up a family. And so when there are communities where a high percentage of the people are going to jail, that means a high percentage of the children in that community are growing up in broken homes. And now that dramatically increases the likelihood that that child will go into a life of crime later in life. So by sending people to jail, we might be thinking, oh, we're getting rid of the bad guys, when in actuality, we're just ensuring that we're going to continue to create generation after generation of criminality, right? Or what we define as criminality. And when you hear all these criminal stories, when you talk to inmates, when you read their memoirs, and there thankfully is a growing library of information coming out of the jails of the people who've been incarcerated, and they'll tell you about their life journey. It's very, very rare to find that person who's like, I was just born bad. I hate other people. I do whatever I want and I get away with it and I enjoy it. That's the anomaly. Now, those people, they do exist, but that's not something that really would account for the massive amount of incarceration that we have in this country. The vast majority are people who come from lower income backgrounds, whose families were torn apart for one reason or another, who had issues with abuse. They were probably physically abused, perhaps sexually abused, emotionally abused. And then our criminal justice system is re-victimizing them. Usually starts at an early age. There's something called the school to prison pathway. That's a real problem, especially for people of color in this country, where they will get singled out earlier on in school as problems. They're getting sent to the principal's office. Then they're getting suspended more. Now, when they're suspended, they're more likely to be able to get recruited by a gang or to just simply get into some minor criminal activity, shoplifting. When they go before a juvenile court in that regard, they're more likely to receive a harsher sentence as a result of the fact that they're a person of color. So they're being groomed almost and told constantly by society, you're the problem. You're a criminal. You're a bad person. And people tend to act towards the character that we put on them. So they start to think of themselves as criminals, and then that becomes the only legitimate pathway for them in life. When you start to see systemically how we got to where we are right now, the answers are there, right? The information is there. And the problem is this myth, and this is why storytelling and why culture is so important, of the good guy putting away the bad guy, the Lone Ranger, whatever it is, Sherlock Holmes out there catching all the criminals. And if you look at the vast majority of shows on television and the movies that we see, they're all about perpetuating that myth. It's from the perspective of the prosecutor, perspective of the homicide investigator, who's going out there and they're finding the bad people who are a danger to all of us good people, and they're putting them away.
Yeah.
And the myth is very appealing because it makes us feel secure, right? That there's good people out there protecting me. I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person. Those bad people are other types of weirdos, and I'm not them. I don't know any of them. But the truth that we have to admit to ourselves is we're all potential bad people. Humans are a range of potentialities. And depending on how each one of us is raised, we could have gone down that road. We could have become a much darker version of the self we have today, or a much lighter version, depending. And if you feel like, you're someone who you can be proud of, that's a real blessing, right? But we still have to have empathy for those and sympathy for those who were not born into that situation. And so the second myth that I think is really important after this sort of good guy, bad guy myth is this myth of crime and punishment, that punishment somehow alleviates crime. And I do think this is where I want to get back to the victims in this, that if we keep the victims central in our minds, we should be asking ourselves, what is going to give this person the most peace? Let's say someone in their family has been killed. Let's say their house has been broken into. However they become a victim of a crime, what's the thing that's going to now give this person the peace that they need to heal? And our criminal justice system doesn't even do a decent job of that, because there's nothing built in procedurally for the victims of crime to have any input in the sentencing of what's going to happen to the person who maybe committed the crime against them, or any ability to just sit down across from that person and say, why did you do this to me? I'm a human being. You've harmed me. For the rest of my life, I'm going to be harmed now because of what you did. I'm traumatized. You've changed my whole life for the worse. I've never met you before. Or actually, if it's a violent crime, it's more likely I do know you and I have met you. Why have you done this to me? And there are times in sentencing where a judge could allow a victim of a crime to speak to the jury, but there's nothing built into the system. And there's nothing built in, like I said before, for the families of the victim, or also the criminal. Let's say the criminal has to go to jail, and now that family doesn't have a parent there anymore. What's going to happen to those kids? There's no counselor who goes and talks to them, who says, your parent did a bad thing. You're not bad people. We understand now your family is suffering as a result of this, so we want you to be able to talk through that. That never takes place, right? Mm-hmm. And so this idea of crime and punishment, when we bring in the punishment aspect of it, there's more likely than not, there's going to be a re-traumatization of somebody who's already been involved with this crime. And there are other alternatives, right? For instance, Pennsylvania has instituted something called restorative justice for their entire juvenile criminal system. And they're seeing tremendous results with this. And restorative justice is this idea that whenever a crime has been committed, there's now a wound in this culture, in the society. And the goal of the society should be to heal that wound, to provide as much healing as possible. Because if that wound is left there, or if it's made worse, right, that's when infection sets in. That's when the thing can fester. That's when you lose the whole arm, instead of just having a scar there. So they use a lot of counseling. They bring in the victim of the crime as well to have their input in the process. And it's led to tremendous results in their juvenile court system since they made the switch. It hasn't been that long. The data is just starting to come in, but they've already seen the cost of incarceration has gone way down, because incarcerating people is a huge expense to the state. So even if you had no empathy or sympathy and you just cared about your tax dollars, right, it's still in your interest to care about this issue. And they've seen the cost go down because they have to house less juvenile inmates. And then the recidivism rates, or the likelihood that these juvenile offenders will repeat offense, has gone way down. And it's starting to trickle down into the adult offenders as well. Because as I said before, once you get on that pathway as a juvenile offender and you think you're no good and you think you're a criminal and you think that's your only option, you tend to become an adult offender. So by intervening early with these counseling opportunities, these healing opportunities, then we're able to, they're able to in Pennsylvania to intercept that pathway, cut it off before they go to adults, and help these kids divert away from a criminal lifestyle. So the restorative justice option is a really, really appealing one, and they're starting to experiment with it around the country. For some adult courts as well, There's really interesting stuff being done with diversionary courts, which is, let's say, especially there's like a veterans diversionary court. There's a couple of them around the country because we know as a society we do a terrible job with reacclimating our veterans to civilian society after they come back from a conflict. And a lot of them, as a result of that, turn to drugs and alcohol dependency to cope with both the trauma that they encountered abroad and then also their inability to find a place to belong when they come back home. And that in the past, we've had a high percentage of veterans ending up incarcerated because of their drug and alcohol abuse. But now we have some intervention courts that are run and staffed by former veterans who can speak specifically to these people and say, I know what you're going through because I went through it. Here's a drug treatment program, an alcohol treatment program. The court is going to give you 30 days to go into this program, to get sober, to learn some life coping skills. And if you complete these benchmarks, we're going to throw out these criminal charges. So you don't have to go to jail. You don't have to have that criminal charge. But we're going to be with you and monitoring you every step of the way. And they've seen tremendous results with that as well. So there are a lot of cool and interesting ideas out there. But as you said before, the myth is still the good, overwhelmingly. You know, our current attorney general, he strongly perpetuates this like strong arm lawman who's going to lock away the bad guys. And from my experience, when you really start to look at the information and data out there, that's just totally inaccurate. That's not what is happening out there. And there's no way, if you look for bad guys to lock up, you will find them, right? You'll make regular people into those bad guys and you'll lock them up.
Whoa. Absolutely.
That's a lot, right?
Keep going if there's something else you want to add, because I'm going to make a quick reflection of my own here too. Brilliantly said, Daniel. Is there anything else that you want to mention at that point?
Well, just to answer your question specifically, so we have this myth. Also, you have to keep in mind that the defense attorneys out there who are doing the best they possibly can, they're way underfunded. In most municipalities, the defense office does not receive the same amount of funding as the prosecutor's office. And they carry a huge caseload. They might have 250, 300 clients a year, which means they have 10 minutes, if that, to sit with their client right before the trial, to go over the police report and all the discovery files they've been given from the prosecution, who's had it for a much longer period of time, and to say, okay, looks like, they got you on the camera here and you don't have an alibi. And we're going to have to plead out and say that you agree to plead guilty in exchange for 10 years instead of 15 years. And that client who has no experience with the law is now being told your only options are 10 years or 15 years. Which do you want? Obviously, you want 10. So that's why like 95% of all cases in this country end in a plea deal. But in reality, the prosecution, they're stacking charges. So they're very creative and they look for, in each case, how many different charges they can stack on top of your actual crime to increase the amount of time you're facing in jail, so they can really leverage you to take that plea deal because they don't want to go to trial because that takes more time and more resources. And so the prosecutor's office, they have less cases to work, they have more funding, they have more time with the information, and they get to increase the charges being put against people to encourage them heavily, persuade them to take a plea deal. And also, the prosecutor's office is much more politically connected. Mm-hmm. So if there is a governor, if there is a mayor, they want to look good in the eyes of the citizens and perpetuate this myth of we're the good guys putting the bad guys away. So we want a high conviction rate. We want to show that we put more people away than the predecessor who was in office before us. So I look at my head prosecutor, my district attorney, and I say, I need you to double the conviction rate from last year. I need you to clean up this part of town, put all the bad guys away. And so they just go in and they start putting people in jail, which they have an ability to do because of the way the legal system is set up. They have a lot of power. They have power on choosing who to prosecute, what charges to bring against them, how much financial resources to devote against them. And all this is above board. This is all totally legal, right? Before you get into corruption and collusion, which is also a problem in many municipalities as well. And so it should be no surprise that we end up with a lot of innocent people in jail. And also that a lot of politicians go into the prosecutor's office because they know it's going to make them look good in the eyes of the public, and it's where they can make political connections and use that to leverage themselves as viable political candidates.
Look at that. Whoa, people, you got to give this guy a standing ovation. And, we can't see you can't see us right now, but I can see you, and I know my listeners. You love what Daniel just said, the way he said it. He got to everything. I'll tell you, man, it was brilliant exposition there of the criminal justice system in this country. and by way of an ABC screenwriter, by way of a show called How to Get Away with Murder, and why more people aren't defense attorneys. Now, I'm going to add my 2 cents here at this point, too. You know, People of Distinction is about debunking myths. All right, sometimes even if they're true. Now, get this. You know, the average Joe Josephine out there, we're all kind of that anyway, unless we're the billionaire class, and that's what, some sort of minute fraction of even 1%. But we're all Joes and Josephines, and so the Joe out there is saying, oh yeah, well, they deserve to go to prison. Look at that. I mean, not only the crime, but the background, and look at that broken family. No direction. We got to put these people behind bars and all. Okay, yeah. Now get this. What do you expect? Understand what you're saying might be factual. Maybe maybe it's not a myth at that point. Oh yeah, broken home, this and that, and they didn't really have the good father image. What do you expect, people? Now let's turn this thing around. What if it were you? Yeah, you there but for fortune. Now, there you go down the same alleyway. We're all people. We start out that baby coming out of that womb and we say, whoa, I'm here. I made it. I'm alive. I'm blessed. Every single human being on this face of the planet was born a baby. It's the biggest thing we have in common, people. And that baby, all that baby wanted to do was love. Well, maybe after that baby started to be 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, if that baby were you, and maybe you didn't see your father, maybe you just had your mother, and your mother had to go out to work all the time just to pay the bills, and maybe there wasn't enough food coming in, maybe not nourishment, and then you hit the educational system, and that's a process of elimination right there. Oh yeah, we're not going to treat you exactly, even though they might not say it to your face. Okay, you're a person of color. You're a black guy and this and that. And, well, you're not going to get really the best here. Well, what do you expect, people? After all of that stuff, the people who are put behind bars, they're not 8 and 9-year-old kids. They are maybe starting at 18, maybe starting at 19 or something like that, or maybe going into their 20s. By that time, the system has put so much garbage in their way. Putting this, not to denigrate anybody, but boy, you try to live that way and see how far you get. And if you're just out there, maybe, I'm going to say panhandling, is I'm trying to make a buck because you've been deprived of all of the other ways that maybe Ivy League people are not, and I come from that background. All right, so I've been blessed. Well, what are you going to do? What do you expect, people? Now, as a society, we have to look at it differently. Yeah, as individuals, we can point the finger, we can denigrate, we can look down upon, or we can look up upon, to our so-called heroes. But as a society, do you see where this society is going after all of these years, people? It's going downhill. Now, we know that because, make America great again. When was America maybe at its greatest point? I don't think it was during the slave trade. I don't think it was, at the time of even the signing of that Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, when, the Founding Fathers got together and they were imperious people. All right, so they had a lot of advantages, and they didn't want to give everybody the vote, and not everybody had the vote. That was not the shining hour, no. And then later on, the Industrial Revolution, where little kids were, they had to go to work, and maybe lose an arm or a leg or something like that and not get the education that they needed. I don't think it was that. Was it World War I? What do you mean? Millions of people dying. I don't think it was that. Was it World War II? Millions of people dying. I don't think it was that. If there was a shining hour in the American experience that some people say, oh, let's bring America back to that, well, maybe it was the 50s. The GI Bill. And people coming out of the war, getting married and wanting the best for their kids, starting families. Get it, people? But at that point, didn't include a lot of black people. Maybe it did. But it certainly didn't include a lot of Hispanics. Didn't include a lot of Asians. With the demographics have changed, people. Get that. This is a country, nearly 50% people of color. It's a different world. And if we want to do the best for everybody in our society, and I think we do, if we want to do the best for our society in general, now we got to look at what the real deal is. How many people can we put behind bars without our society suffering? How many people of color can we denigrate through the educational system without the entire society suffering? How many plea bargains can we have before we're putting too many innocent people behind bars? And what goes around comes around. You know, what's going to happen 20 years from now, 30 years from now? What is happening now and going around to 20, 30 years from now, when the millennials are middle age, what are they going to be doing? When they can't even sometimes make a living on their own right now. They are a generation who, the first generation in American history that we know about, who are probably not going to be doing as well as their parents, or who are not doing as well as their parents right now, and maybe won't 20, 30 years ago. Let's think of that, people. Come on. Let's do it for everybody. Let's make America great again now for everybody. Let's debunk some myths, even if they are true, and say, well, what do you expect? How many haves can we have and how many have-nots can we have before revolution might occur? And maybe it's happening right now. Hey, a lot of people are speaking their minds, and even in Congress. Okay, maybe even some of these prosecuting attorneys from Congress. But see, more and more everyday Joes and Josephines are going to get out there and speak their mind. Hey, we don't like this recidivism rate. What do you expect? Come on, let's change some minds here, people. And we do that on People of Distinction. And Daniel, this is great. You got me going there, brother.
Yeah, you're right up. I want to say one thing off of that, because I think so much of what you just said is so true, so on point. But I don't want people to feel hopeless in the face of all of this, because, like I said before, the thing about the law is it is a living, breathing, changing thing. It can change. It changes constantly. And when we do have these Supreme Court rulings that shift, a major policy in America, they have drastic consequences and results for everybody around. And within not just the federal government, within your state government, most courts are not federal courts; they're state courts. Most law takes place at a more local level than maybe we feel like our government does. And so there's lots of legal battles being fought constantly that can have a big impact. So there's always an opportunity for change. And so we shouldn't be made hopeless and feel like we need to disinvest from the process. We should feel hopeful, and we should feel more invested in it and pay more attention to it, and get involved where we feel compelled to, whatever specific issues maybe are affecting us locally. And you can have an opportunity to make an impact, whether that's through a criminal trial, the civil court system and suing somebody or suing some type of ideal, or there's people who go around, testing. They're looking for test cases to test the constitutionality of certain laws and to find that right trial to bring into the court system that could appeal up to the Supreme Court and maybe change some precedent in this country. So there's a lot of opportunity. I live in California, and we've had some changes, really good changes over the last few years. Thankfully, our governor just put an end to the death penalty, or at least he's going to stop carrying out the death penalty while he's in office. I don't know if he can fully outlaw it just based on his powers. But in addition to that, we talked about juveniles on here, and there used to be an ability to sentence a juvenile offender to life without parole in the state of California. And we know from all sorts of scientific research that juveniles' brains are not fully formed yet. They can't make the same rational decisions an adult can. They don't understand the consequences of their actions. And so we were sentencing someone for something they did when they were 13 years old for the rest of their life to jail. And we're trying to get away with that now, or at least give them an opportunity to appeal their conviction, which they didn't have before, so that they can maybe get paroled. Because by the time they're 40 years old, they're an entirely different person than they were when they were 13 years old, right? And all they've done is repent and reflect and try to build themselves into a functioning, better human being. And so we have to be able to forgive people for those things and allow them to move on. So there's still opportunity, tremendous opportunity to be invested in the legal system and to fight battles that will really have an impact on the culture at large.
Well, absolutely. And on People of Distinction, like Daniel, precursor there, absolutely. We always have happy endings with possibility thinking and love being the answer. Now, obviously, we're in an expanded People of Distinction right now. Usually my shows don't go this long, but Daniel has been just so great with the information, with, what's really going on in our society these days. And I'd love to hear it from millennials. So just a few more minutes here of possibility thinking. And, of course, love is a big part of the answer. It's a big part of People of Distinction. How we get together, honoring each other and respecting each other. Now, possibility thinking. I end all of my shows with possibility thinking, Daniel, in terms of, whatever my guest was talking about. What if some of the positive things came to pass in our society from whatever interview we were doing? And going back to your book, First They Ignore You, Addiction, Eating Disorders. Let's say, this is possibility thinking, at a certain point, 10 years from now, 20, 50 years from now, maybe next week if we're really lucky as a society, wow, all gone. There are no more addiction or eating disorders. Now, that can happen. They're not carved in stone for the rest of humanity's life. Let's say that there are no more addictions, no more eating disorders. Now, there's still things that we have to overcome, but those two we've overcome. Let's say that now, in our politics and in our social lives, it's a little bit more egalitarian. Maybe not perfect, but a little bit more egalitarian. So you put those factors together. What kind of world would that look like that it doesn't look like now, Daniel?
Oh, it looks wonderful. It just looks like a lot of happy, healthy people who have self-confidence, who have self-love, who are able to accept the love of others and feel appreciated, who don't experience shame just for being who they are. And they're able to form healthy, lasting bonds with many different people. They feel valued and honored in their daily lives. They feel appreciated, and they're able to contribute in the ways that they feel like they can contribute to the world at large. They can bring their passion to bear. There's less suffering amongst families. There's less homelessness. There's less criminal activity, and there's just a lot of happiness and joy out there. It'd be a much better life. There's so many people, so many families who suffer through addiction. Whoever might be affected in silence, right? It's sort of that family's silent trauma, and they're constantly trying to deal with it, and it's a drain on their emotional resources and their financial resources, and it can break families apart. And so a world without addiction just looks like a much happier, healthier place.
Absolutely. And I'm going to take it out with a final reflection here, underscoring the great reflection that Daniel just made in possibility thinking and all through the show. My 2 cents here at the end of the show. Hey, people, now, that's a beautiful world that we're talking about without addictions, without eating disorders, a little bit more egalitarian in the social directions, the political spheres, all that stuff. Hey, look, we want that sort of world. Guess what, people? You're living in it. Now, I'm putting it this way, and somebody's going to say, Al, what do you mean we're living with it? Just a little while ago you were saying that we ain't. All right, now I'm saying we are on a different level. In our hearts and souls, we're already there. Sometimes it's good to just take a little bit of alone time, drop out of, the huss and the fuss, or sometimes of the outside world. Get to know you a little bit more. Get to know your real passions in life, what you really stand for. Again, love. The real loves in your life. Recount some of the love that you've given, the love that you've received. Now, you start doing that, you're elevating yourself. Whoa, you're at a different energy level. At that point, you're saying, I'm a baby again. Whoa, the baby of innocence and that innocence of love from whence you came. You came there. You can get there again, anytime. And you do get there, sometimes even as an adult. Everybody has somebody that's loved them and they've loved in some point in their life. Now, maybe you're at that point right now. Actually, that person that you love, you want to do the best for that person because of love, even if you lose that person at some point. But now, think of when that person's in your life, and you say, honey, how can I help you to be the very best that you can be? Get that? You can do that at any point in your life, and you have done it at least once, and maybe over and over again. Maybe you're one of the blessed ones, maybe a 50-year marriage. Okay. You start doing that stuff more and more. Think about some of the positive things that you can do for somebody else. And now it's not just, hey, I'm trying to be the very best that you can be. You're being the very best that somebody else can be. All right. I just coined a phrase, but I use it a lot on people of distinction. Be the very best that somebody else can be, and you're going to find that's easy. You know, anybody that I really care for, really love. And then you start masterminding that. Be the very, very best that somebody else can be that you don't even know. Say a prayer for somebody that you don't even know, people. Yeah, do it tonight. Say a prayer for, just make up a name. There are a lot of names out there. Make up one, send it out with energy, and send it out in the name of love. Yeah, I care about somebody out there that might need this prayer. Whoa, might come back to you. Might lift your energy level, that love energy within. You start doing that, we create a better world that way. As we create a better world, now we don't have a lot of the problems that we were talking about at the beginning. We don't have a lot of addictions. We don't have a lot of disorders. We respect each other a little bit more, and respect is right around the block from love, people. See, and that's what we talk about on People of Distinction with Al Cole. Especially when we have Daniel Robinson on the line and talking about his book, First They Ignore You. It's at Amazon. Go and buy it. And really, look for this show, this ABC show, How to Get Away with Murder, spotlighting some defense attorneys. And try to get in touch with Daniel if you can. And really get absorbed by some of his greatness, some of his wisdom. You're going to find that it comes back home to roost. It's some of your wisdom as well and your greatness in our human family. Thank you so much, Daniel, for being my special guest here today on People of Distinction with Al Cole. I'll invite you back anytime, brother, for updates on all of your great work. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Oh, it was great. I didn't know I had all that in me that I wanted to say. It just came out real quick there, huh?
So until next time, people, wish you peace, awareness, romance, and mostly love.